Masechet Nedarim, Daf Yod Aleph. We're starting on the Mishnah at the bottom of the previous Daf. Mishnah is going to be talking about some interesting substitute words. Instead of saying that this food that I eat from you will be like a korban, that's a very clear statement saying that it will be prohibited to me like a korban. Someone says other language, like Ha'omer la cholin shelo ochal lecha, la kasher, vela dechi, tahor vetameh notar upigol asur. If someone says the food that I will eat of yours should be la chulin, we're interpreting la chulin not as one word, which would be leha chulin, to the chulin. That wouldn't make any sense, but rather we're going to parse it as if the person meant two words, la cholin, not chulin. The word lo in Hebrew means not, but in Aramaic it's la. So it would be really the same pronunciation if someone says la cholin, to mean to the cholin or not cholin. And so therefore we interpreted it to mean not chulin. So the full sentence is, that which I eat from you will be not chulin. Chulin means permitted meat, kosher, regular meat. So if I say it's not, that means it's not kosher. Whatever I eat from you will be not kosher. If a person says that, it doesn't make the food not kosher. The food's either kosher or not kosher. It's not going to affect it. It's not going to affect its OU label. Rather, it means I'm taking a vow. It will be prohibited to me like something that is not chulin. What's not chulin? A korban is not chulin. So that's the same as saying whatever I eat from you will be a korban is equivalent to whatever I eat from you will be the opposite of chulin, which is a korban. So that works. Or if he says la kasher, not kosher, that also, even though the opposite of kosher is not kosher, like whatever pig or meat and milk, it's not, the opposite is not a korban. Nevertheless, that also makes a vow, not kosher, meaning that I am prohibited to eat it. So whatever I eat from you, I will be prohibited to. Or if he says la dechi, dechi is Aramaic for pure, so I'm considering it like a korban that is not pure. So that's something that's prohibited to eat. Or if he says tahor or tameh, now even though these are two opposite words, what he has in mind is he's referring to a korban. A korban that's tahor, one cannot eat, or korban that's tameh, also one cannot eat. One that's tahor can be eaten after the sprinkling of the blood by kohanim or to shelamim by other people, but assuming it's before the sprinkling of the blood, a korban that's tahor still cannot be eaten. So we assume that that's what he has in mind. Whatever I eat from you, she'ochal lecha, will be like a korban tahor, or like a korban tameh, not allowed, or like notad or pigul. Notad is something that was left over, a korban, that's left over after the cutoff time. Different korbanot you can eat for a day, or in a night, or 2 days, but that's it. If it's left over after that cutoff time, it's prohibited to be eaten, has to be burnt. Pigul is if someone has in mind, with a kohen, when preparing it, has wrong intention in mind. He has in mind that he's going to eat it after at the wrong time, after the cutoff. That person who eats that will get karet. So all these are prohibited. The notad and pigul, that notad could be even after the sprinkling of the blood, but it's still prohibited. So all these are things that are prohibited. If someone says anything I eat from you will be like any of these items, that in fact is prohibited. Okay, more examples. Ke'imra, kadirim, ka'esim, ka'ishim, ka'mizbeach, ka'hechal, ki'irushalayim, nadar bechad mikol meshamesheh ha'mizbeach, afapi shelo hiskir korban, hare ze neder bekorban. Someone says, like the lamb. Doesn't mean any lamb. We assume he means like a lamb that is designated for an offering, or like the pens that they used to keep the animals in, that they are donating and going to be used for a korban. Or if he says like the wood, this is the wood that they would place on the mizbeach, or like the fires of the mizbeach, or like the mizbeach itself, or he says like the sanctuary. All these things are prohibited. You cannot derive any personal benefit from any of these items. And so if he says anything that I eat from you will be like the hechal, then that is prohibited as a language of a vow. If he says like Jerusalem, Jerusalem is a holy city. It was built with public funds, with holy funds, and therefore that also will create a vow. Anyone who makes a vow in any referring to any of the vessels used on Mizbeach, different bowls and forks that were dedicated to Korban, those are prohibited. You can't take one of those cups and just take a drink out of it. So even though he didn't mention Korban, this is as if he made a vow and said, whatever I eat from you will be like a Korban. These are all equivalent substitute terms. All that is Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer HaOmer Yerushalayim lo amar kelum. It looks like Rabbi Yehuda is arguing with Tanakama, and he would agree with all the rest of the items except for Jerusalem. If he says this is prohibited to me like Jerusalem, he didn't say anything, because Yerushalayim actually is, you can, the stones and the dirt of Jerusalem, although it's a holy place in general, is not prohibited to use. It's not like the Mizbeach or the Hechal that you cannot use that. You cannot use them, you can't lean on them, but a regular stone in Jerusalem, you can sit on it, you can take it home, and so that would not be a problem. So the Yehuda disagrees with Yerushalayim. That seems to be the Peshat, a simple reading of the Mishnah. The Gemara is going to offer that reading, but also a different reading, that the Yehuda's argument is with Ke Yerushalayim versus Yerushalayim. The Yehuda would actually be in agreement with Tanakama. If he says this is prohibited like Yerushalayim, then it makes a prohibition. But if he doesn't say like Yerushalayim, he just says Yerushalayim without the Ke, then he has not said anything, because that's too vague of a connection. So that's another reading that we will see in a minute. Okay, Savruha, my la cholin, la lecholin leheve, ela korban. So we are understanding in the Mishnah, we're understanding that a person who says la cholin, he doesn't mean leha cholin, to the cholin. But rather, he means it as two words. This will not be chulin. If what I eat from you is not chulin, then that means I'm making it a korban. So we see from, even though he didn't say a positive statement that I am making this prohibited, from the negative we can infer the positive, right? If this loaf here is, if I'm saying it's not chulin, it's not regular non-sacred food, then I'm implying that it is korban, and therefore it is prohibited. Okay, so Mani Matnitin, who is the author of this Mishnah? It can't be Rabbi Meir, because in general, Rabbi Meir does not follow the principle that from a negative you can infer a positive. Titanan, how do we know that that Rabbi Meir says that? Rabbi Meir Omer kol tenai sheno kenai bnei Gad bnei Reuben eno tenai. We know this from the laws of how to make a condition. If you want to write a condition in a contract or say a condition, you have to say it like that of bnei Gad and bnei Reuben. In the Torah, when Gad and Reuben come to Moshe, and they say, listen, we want to settle outside the borders of Israel on the other side of the Jordan. Can we do that? Moshe, right after deliberation, comes back and says, you have a condition. If you come into the land and fight with us and help us conquer the land, then you can go back and settle the land outside. But that's the positive. If you do not come into the land and help us battle and conquer the land, then you will not be able to go and settle on the other side of the land. That's how it says in the Torah, both the positive and the negative. Rabbi Meir learns from that a prototype. Every condition that you say has to be in the positive and said in the negative. If you say it only in the negative, you cannot infer the positive. If you say only positive, you cannot infer the negative either. Okay, so since he says that there, it's true for languages of vows as well. According to the Rabbi Meir, if someone says this bread here is going to be not chulin, then it just means it's not chulin. We cannot infer the positive that it is korban, and therefore, according to the Rabbi Meir, it would be permitted. So he cannot be the author of this Mishnah, because this Mishnah says la chulin makes a valid vow. Ela Rabbi Yehuda, he rather it must be Rabbi Yehuda. We don't quote it here, but there is a Gemara in Gitin 46b that does have the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda against Rabbi Meir. That's in a different context of someone who divorces his wife because she's an Ailonit. And there, Rabbi Yehuda, even if he doesn't make a double language of a yes or no, Rabbi Yehuda considers it a valid condition, even only one way. So we learn from there that Rabbi Yehuda generally will infer a positive from a negative. So it must be that this Gemara, this Mishnah, is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, right? Hold on, Ema Sefa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer HaOmer Yerushalayim Lo Amar Kelum. Midasefa Rabbi Yehuda Reshalav Rabbi Yehuda He. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees at the end and says, if you said, this whatever I eat from you will be Yerushalayim, he has not said anything. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Tanakama. Since that the Sefa is Rabbi Yehuda, the rest of the Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda. It makes sense, so it can't be Rabbi Yehuda either. We answer, Kula Rabbi Yehuda hi v'hachi katani she Rabbi Yehuda omer haomer Yerushalayim lo amar kelum. In fact, we can read the Mishnah as being entirely the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And so Rabbi Yehuda is saying everything, and then we just note at the end, how come all these things are prohibited? Because it's based on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Everything is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, because he says, if you say, Yerushalayim, you haven't said anything. But Rabbi Yehuda would agree that if you said Ke Yerushalayim, then that is a valid vow. So in fact, there's not a machloket between Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda. It is all Rabbi Yehuda. And the last part is simply quoting an explicit statement of Rabbi Yehuda explaining that Yerushalayim would be the exception. But in the other cases, Ke, as long as it said Ke regarding this set of statements, that would be fine. Note that according to this explanation, you don't have to say Ke tameh or ke notar. These the first set of substitutes here are much more explicit, because you're actually referring to something that is a korban, that is notar or something like that. But these, which are not actually korbanot, but just things that are prohibited in relation to korbanot, just the lamb, here you would have to say the word ke, according to this explanation of Rabbi Yehuda. So there we go. Our Mishnah is in fact the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, all of it. Okay. V'chi amar ke Yerushalayim Rabbi Yehuda mi mitzar. So now, according to this explanation, the whole Mishnah is opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you said Yerushalayim, there's no vow. But if you said ke Yerushalayim, then there is a vow. Is that true? V'hatanya, we have another braita. It's kind of parallel to the Mishnah that says, Rabbi Yehuda omer haomer ke Yerushalayim lo amar kelum ad sheyido b'dabar ha'kareh b'Yerushalayim. In this braita, Rabbi Yehuda says, even if you say like Yerushalayim, it's like you said nothing. There's no vow, because you have to make something, a vow about something that is sacrificed in Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem itself is not holy like a korban. You have to say something that is associated with the Bet HaMikdash, with a sacrifice, things that happen in Jerusalem, but not just the city itself. You see, this Baraita seems to accord with the Peshat of the Mishnah. It doesn't matter if you say Ke or not Ke. Yerushalayim by itself is not holy in the same way that a Korban or things associated with a Korban are holy. So this would seem to go against that interpretation, that the entire Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. But we answer, Kula Rabbi Yehuda hi utre tanei alibad Rabbi Yehuda. In fact, our entire Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. And there are two Tanaim, there are two versions of tradents that explain Rabbi Yehuda or transmit the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda differently. So in this Baraita, this follows one interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda, that Yerushalayim, Ke Yerushalayim, none of that makes a vow, because Yerushalayim does not have the intrinsic holiness like a Korban, whereas the other transmitter, the other interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda, is the one in our Mishnah. According to that, Rabbi Yehuda would permit if you said just Yerushalayim, but would prohibit if you said Ke Yerushalayim. That would make a binding vow. And so we'll stick with that interpretation so that our entire Mishnah will be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, because otherwise we'll be stuck, because we know it can't be Rabbi Meir, so we need it to be Rabbi Yehuda. All right, that's the discussion of the Mishnah. Now we're going to bring in a Baraita that is going to clarify with a few more cases. Tanya, Chulin ha-chulin ka-chulin ben she'ochal lecha ben she'lo ochal lecha mutar. If someone said either any of these three words, notice they're not la-chulin, but just chulin, ha-chulin, ka-chulin, right? Not non-sacred or the non-sacred or like the non-sacred. Whether he attached that to the following two phrases, that I will eat from you or that I won't eat from you, all these things are permitted, because we mix and match them. If he says, whatever I eat from you will be chulin, will be permitted, well, then that's permitted, right? Anything he eats is permitted, so surely that's permitted. And even if he says, that which I will not eat from you is permitted, okay, that's fine, that's permitted. We're going to see in a second here that this implies that this is in fact Rabbi Meir, because theoretically you could infer that if I say that which I do not eat from you is permitted, then the implication is that which I will eat from you is not permitted. Okay, so but we don't make that inference from negative to positive, so all these cases are permitted. On the other hand, if I say la chulin shelo chalecha asur, la chulin is completely different from chulin ha chulin ka chulin, because la chulin we interpret to mean that to mean not chulin as two words. Although theoretically a person might mean to the chulin leha chulin, but no, we assume that he may have meant not chulin, that I will eat from you. That's no good, because then he's saying whatever I eat from you will not be chulin, meaning it'll be like a korban. That is surely prohibited. If he said la chulin lo ochal lecha mutar, however, if he says what I will not eat from you will not be chulin, then it's permitted, because I only said whatever I don't eat from you will be prohibited. That infers that whatever I do eat from you will be permitted. That's the end of the Baraita. Now we're going to analyze who is the author of this Baraita. Resha Maneh Rabbi Meirhi delet le mikelal lav ata shomea hen. The first half seems to be of the opinion of Rabbi Meir, because he does not infer from a negative a positive. And we can see that from this statement here. If someone says, whatever I do not eat from you will be chulin, will be permitted. So if we would infer a negative from a positive from a negative, then we would infer as follows: whatever I don't eat from you will be permitted. We can infer that whatever I do eat from you will be prohibited. But we don't make that inference, because this is mutar. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda, if it was an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, he would say prohibited here, because he would make the inference. So therefore, this Baraita, the first half, must be Rabbi Meir. So far, so good. However, Ema Sefa, la cholin lo ochal lecha mutar. This last phrase, if he says, what I do not from you will be not permitted, okay, well that by itself isn't saying much, and that's permitted, because what I don't eat from you will be prohibited. Okay, fine. What I do eat from you may still be permitted. Here's the problem. V'hatenan la korban lo ochal lecha Rabbi Meir oser. If we interpret la korban as la korban, not a korban, so we have a statement here: what I will not eat from you will not be a korban, meaning what I don't eat from you will be permitted. And Rabbi Meir says oser. That means, it sounds like he's inferring what I do not eat from you will be permitted. That means what I do eat from you will be prohibited. So it sounds like Rabbi Meir is inferring a positive from a negative. And we asked over there, but Rabbi Meir does not have the principle of from a negative we infer a positive. So how come in that Mishnah over there he assumes that it's prohibited? Rabbi Abba, regarding that Mishnah, explained, Na'asa ke'omer le korban yeheh. lefichach lo ochal lecha. What we do is we parse it into two phrases. This will be a korban. We're not saying now la, not korban, but rather yes korban. This will be a korban. Therefore, lo ochal lecha, I will not eat. He's not saying that which I will not eat from you will be not a korban. Rather, he's saying, I will not eat from you, lo ochal lecha, because it's like a korban. So the Biaba explained that we separate it into two phrases, and that's why, according to the Bimeir, it does effectuate a vow. All right, according to the Biaba's methodology, that you separate the phrase into two, hachaname hachika amar le la cholin leheve lefichach lo ochal lecha. That in this phrase too, what he means is this should not be chulin, therefore I will not eat from you. So if we parse it that way, then this phrase would actually make a prohibition. But that would be a problem because the Baraita said, La cholin lo chalecha mutar is permitted. But if this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and so we know the Resha has to be Rabbi Meir, and so if the Sefa is also Rabbi Meir, and we accept the explanation of Rabbi Abba for the next Mishnah, which is a similar phrase, then we'll have to parse this as not chulin, meaning a korban is prohibited, and because it's prohibited, next phrase, lo chalecha, I will not eat from you. So this should be prohibited according to Rabbi Meir. So how could the Sefa be the opinion of Rabbi Meir? And the answer is Haytana Sabala Rabbi Meir bechada ufaleg ale bechada. The author of this baraita is someone else. It's not Rabbi Meir, and he happens to agree with Rabbi Meir in one aspect, but disagree in another aspect. On the one hand, he agrees that with Rabbi Meir in this one principle that you cannot derive a positive from a negative, and that explains the Resha of the Baraita. But he also disagrees with him regarding the phrase in the next Mishnah, where if he says La korban lo ochal lecha, he does not agree with that, and so he would not agree with that you have to parse something into two, and so therefore the Tana, whoever it is, we don't name the person, yes, agrees that if you say lo ochal lecha mutar, if it says lo ochal lecha cholin mutar, what I don't eat from you will be permitted, we're not going to derive a positive from that negative, and therefore it's permitted. Whereas in this phrase, he's not going to parse it like Rabbi Meir would parse it, but rather is going to keep it the way it is. Lo ochal lecha, whatever I do not eat from you will be prohibited. So that just makes a prohibition on whatever he's not eating, but leaves open a permission on whatever he will eat, and that's why it is permitted. So that explains the Baraita. All right, that's all one way of explaining the Baraita, but we have another one. Rav Asher amar hadamar lecholin v'hadamar la lecholin demashma la leheve cholin ela kekorban. In order to explain the contradiction between this Baraita and the Mishnah, Rav Asher says, well, you have to look at the vocalization, right? They didn't have vocalization. This was all oral. But in the oral tradition, you have to readjust how you pronounce it. So in this Baraita, although we were reading it before, La cholin lo ochal lecha, he says, no, read this, Le cholin lo ochal lecha. So that takes out the negative. And in that case, it would be, whatever I do not eat from you will be permitted. And now this is all the Bimeir, according to Rav Asher. We can explain the whole thing according to Bimeir, and he does not infer a positive from a negative. So just because he said, whatever I do not eat from you will be permitted, we are not going to infer that which I do eat is not permitted, so we just leave it as is, and that is permitted. So that's totally fine. Whereas down here, when we made this inference from the Mishnah over there, because if he says La korban lo ochal lecha, and we explained, the Biaba explained that means not La korban. This is not a korban, therefore I will not eat from you. So that in that phrase we separated it, and that's prohibited. And we asked about that. Wait a second. If you say la cholin, so lo echal lecha. Rav Ashi is saying over here we're saying la, not li, like in the Braita. But in fact, if you said not cholin, what I will not eat from you, so then you're saying this is not cholin, and therefore I will not eat from you. So over there you do separate into two phrases, as Rabbi Abba said, because it's la cholin, lo achal lecha. But if you say le cholin, which is the phrase here, lo achal lecha, then you don't separate into two phrases, and then it means that it's permitted. So that's the difference between the two. One is a le and one is a la, and that makes all the difference between a positive and a negative. It turns it completely opposite. Therefore, if we read it that way, demashma la leheve cholin ela ke korban. If you say la cholin, then that means not cholin. This is a korban, that which I will eat from you. So in that case, that in fact does make a prohibition. That explains the Mishnah and the inference from the Mishnah that we made over there. So there you go. That's Rav Ashi. Okay, one final thought that we can learn from this is we wonder, how did they pronounce Hebrew back in the times of the Talmud? We have no audio recordings of it, so it's hard to know. Did they pronounce like Ashkenazim? Did they pronounce like Sepharadim? Did they pronounce like Yemenites? Well, over here we see that they seem to not distinguish between a patach and kamats. Because if you say la cholin, that would be with a kamets, and for them it sounded the same as la cholin, meaning one word, le ha cholin, that would be with a patach. And so therefore you see that since they are debating whether la cholin, does that mean le ha cholin or not cholin, la cholin, that means that seems that their pronunciation was actually like Sepharadim, who do not distinguish between patach and kames, unlike Ashkenazim, who pronounce kemesim as an o sound. Also Yemenites, who pronounce the kames as an o sound, and no, instead they pronounce the kamats gadol the same as patach. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, amen v'amen.